Imagine for a moment that the core story of American independence, the one taught in every schoolroom, is a glorious but simplified banner, waving above a hidden, complex battlefield. The famous generals, the legendary battles, the soaring words of the Declaration, these are the visible history. But beneath the surface, the true war was a clandestine, desperate, and often astonishing struggle waged by people you've likely never heard of. A war of shadows, technological oddities, and breathtaking personal sacrifice that was arguably just as critical as the musketry at Saratoga or the siege at Yorktown. This is the deeper story of the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. It is a true history, information-rich and astonishing, of the secret alliances, the revolutionary technologies, and the ordinary Americans who risked everything, not on a glorious battlefield, but in a fog of espionage and brutal survival. Part 1. The Whisper of Treason and the World's First Naval Misfire. On a moonless night in September 1776, as General Washington and the Continental Army struggled to hold Manhattan against the overwhelming might of the British, an utterly improbable object drifted through the dark waters of New York Harbor. It was shaped like an enormous acorn, made of oak, reinforced with iron bands, and it was piloted by a single, terrified man named Sergeant Ezra Lee. This was the Turtle, the world's first submersible designed for combat. The concept, devised by Yale student and inventor David Bushnell, was a stroke of audacious genius. Since the fledgling Continental Navy was utterly incapable of challenging the hundreds of massive British warships, including the flagship HMS Eagle, anchored right in the harbor, the rebels needed a weapon of terror. The Turtle was a one-man time bomb designed to be manually maneuvered beneath an enemy ship, where Lee would attach a gunpowder charge using a special screw. Lee, sweating and exhausted in the cramped, waterlogged hull, worked the foot pedals that powered the propeller and the hand cranks for the ballast pumps. His mission? Attach the charge to the hull of the formidable Eagle, the 64-gun ship of the line where British Admiral Lord Richard Howe slept. A successful strike would decapitate the British Naval Command in North America, a blow that would resonate across the globe. But the history books focused on the grand strategy of Washington often neglect the almost comical yet intensely real struggle happening just feet below the waves. Lee found his target, pushed the sub to the hull of the ship, and began turning the crank to drive the attachment screw. It scraped and then stopped. Astonishment number 1. The HMS Eagle was not made entirely of wood. Its hull, or at least the area where Lee attempted to drill, had been reinforced with metal plating, either copper or iron sheathing, to protect it from wood-boring worms on its long ocean voyages. The technology of the Royal Navy had accidentally foiled the revolutionary technology of the Continental Army. Frustrated, terrified, and running low on air, Lee tried to reposition the sub, but failed to find a softer spot. As dawn approached, he released the charge as a timed mine and began a hasty retreat. The resulting explosion, which harmlessly erupted far behind the British flagship, was loud enough to alert the sailors. It was a spectacular failure, yet it was a moment that placed the American Revolution at the very cutting edge of military innovation, a strange prologue to modern warfare hidden beneath the grandeur of the conventional fight. The Turtle sank soon after, lost to the depths, but the whisper of its existence lingered, a ghost story of American ingenuity that was a real, desperate attempt to turn the tide. Part 2. The farmers, tailors, and women who became the copper spy ring. While General Washington was often portrayed as a brilliant battlefield strategist, his true genius lay in his capacity for self-preservation and, most critically, intelligence gathering. After the defeats in New York, he realized the British command in the city was an impenetrable knot. To sever that knot, he needed eyes and ears where no soldier could go. Thus was born the Culper spy ring, one of the most sophisticated and enduring espionage networks in military history, whose operations for years were more closely guarded than any battle plan. Its astonishment lies in the absolute ordinariness of its members. They were not professional spies. They were shopkeepers, farmers, and a courageous woman who became a ghost in the occupied city. The ring operated primarily out of British-occupied New York City and Long Island. Their members used code names. The very word Culper was a code name. Culper Jr., Robert Townsend, a mild-mannered dry goods merchant in Manhattan. His shop was the perfect place to overhear gossip from British officers and loyalist merchants. He wrote his messages using invisible ink, sympathetic stain made from ferrous sulfate in water, which became visible when brushed with the chemical reagent, usually vitriol, or sometimes simply heat. His existence, his true role, was concealed for a century. Agent 355, the most mysterious and arguably most valuable member of the ring. Historians have never conclusively identified her, only that she was a highly placed woman in New York society, perhaps a hostess or even a relative of a British officer. Her knowledge was often crucial, gleaned from the intimate, unguarded conversations of the British elite. It is widely believed she was arrested and died on the infamous prison ship HMS Jersey. Her sacrifice, lost to history by name, is a tragic astonishment, a brilliant mind that saved the revolution consumed by the war's darkest corners. Anna Strong, a Long Island farmer's wife. Her role was simple, brilliant, and dependent entirely on her laundry. Using her laundry line, she would hang specific arrangements of handkerchiefs and petticoats to signal to the intelligence carrier Caleb Brewster where he was to meet the next agent and where the dispatch was hidden. A black petticoat and a specific number of handkerchiefs signaled the location of the secret message drop box. Her laundry line was an early American semaphore, a message system hiding in plain sight. The ring's most critical intelligence came in 1780. A British operation was meticulously planned to ambush the arriving French fleet at Newport, Rhode Island. The Culper ring intercepted the plan, wrote it in invisible ink, and sent it galloping to Washington. The general, utilizing the information, was able to warn the French, saving the entire fleet and preserving the crucial Franco-American alliance. This wasn't a skirmish, it was a victory of wits and courage over overwhelming force, won by a tailor, a merchant, and a woman who used her household chores as a weapon. Part 3. The Black and Indigenous Soldiers who fought for a hypocritical ideal. The American Revolution was fought on the grand ideal of all men are created equal, but this ideal was a staggering hypocrisy for the thousands of enslaved Africans and Native Americans who lived within the colonies. Yet many of these individuals fought in the war, often making sacrifices that put the famous patriots to shame. Astonishment number 3 is the sheer number and diversity of the Continental Army's forgotten ranks. The Black Patriots. At the battles of Lexington and Concord, the very first skirmishes, Black soldiers fought alongside white militias. By the war's end, historians estimate between 5,000 and 8,000 Black men served in the Continental Army and Navy, often in integrated units that were far ahead of their time. Prince Whipple and Salem Poor two of the most celebrated black soldiers known for their heroism at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Poor, a free man, was cited for a brave and gallant behavior that earned him an official commendation from 14 officers, a rare honor that acknowledged his extraordinary courage in the face of heavy British fire. Lord Dunmore's proclamation. On the other side of the line, in a cynical yet revolutionary move, the British governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, offered freedom to any enslaved person who would desert their patriot master and fight for the crown. This instantly swelled the ranks of the Loyalists, with tens of thousands of enslaved people seizing their chance for liberty. They formed the Ethiopian Regiment, wearing sashes that read, "Liberty to Slaves." This created a unique moral paradox. Many enslaved people saw the British, ironically, as their true liberators, forcing the Patriots to confront the contradiction of fighting for their own freedom while denying it to others. The Native American War. The Revolution was a brutal civil war that extended deep into the forests and frontiers. For many Native American nations, the conflict was less about British taxes and more about survival. They were forced to choose sides, knowing that the loser would inevitably cost them their land. The Iroquois Confederacy, a sophisticated political union that had existed for centuries, split dramatically. The Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca generally allied with the British, seeing them as the lesser threat to their sovereignty. The Oneida and Tuscarora, however, sided with the Americans, influenced by American-friendly missionaries and promising deals. The consequence of this split was devastating. The war was fought with merciless ferocity between the tribes, shattering the centuries-old Confederacy. In 1779, Washington ordered General Sullivan to conduct a scorched earth campaign against the British Iroquois, resulting in the burning of dozens of towns and the destruction of vast crops. This act, known as the Sullivan Expedition, was a brutal military necessity that ultimately cleared the way for American expansion, demonstrating that the fight for liberty often came at the cost of genocide for others. The legacy of the Revolutionary War is thus not a simple story of triumph, but a complex tapestry of intersecting fights for liberation, identity, and sheer survival, where freedom for one group often hinged on the subjugation of another. Part 4. The Death Ships of New York Harbor. While the story of Valley Forge is widely taught, the cold, the starvation, the perseverance, the most shocking atrocity of the war, a detail often softened in the retelling, took place not on a winter encampment, but aboard rotting hulks in New York Harbor. The British held vast numbers of American prisoners of war, POWs. Unable or unwilling to build proper land prisons, they converted decommissioned, disease-ridden warships into floating dungeons. These were the British prison ships, and they were a hell that claimed more American lives than every battle combined. Astonishment number 4 is that more than twice as many American soldiers and sailors died on British prison ships than were killed in combat. The most infamous was the HMS Jersey, often called Hell Afloat. Overcrowded, unsanitary, and starving, the conditions were unimaginable. Men were crammed below deck with little light and air, subjected to brackish water and rations infested with vermin. Diseases like smallpox and dysentery swept through the holds like wildfire. The brutality was systematic. Guards often refused medical care, and food was withheld as punishment. When men died, their bodies were simply thrown overboard, or at times, crudely buried in shallow graves on the Brooklyn shore. Historians estimate that over 11,000 Americans died in these ships in New York Harbor alone. To put that into perspective, the total number of American battle deaths for the entire war is estimated to be around 6,800. The POWs had a choice: starve and die in the fetid holds, or swear an oath of allegiance to the king and join the British service. The vast majority refused. Their unseen, uncelebrated martyrdom in the dark of the ship's holds is arguably the single greatest sacrifice of the American Revolution, a quiet, horrifying testimony to the depth of commitment to the ideal of a new republic. The American victory was not just secured by musket fire and political declarations, but by the extraordinary, agonizing resolve of men enduring unimaginable suffering on ships like the Jersey, which became the ultimate, brutal test of the revolutionary spirit. Part 5. The French Alliance, the true turning point. The Declaration of Independence was a brave, essential step, but it did not win the war. The Continental Army, a ragged collection of militias and professional soldiers, was fundamentally incapable of defeating the world's most powerful military empire alone. The single most critical event of the entire war was the Battle of Saratoga in October 1777. The victory there, where the American forces surrounded and captured the entire army of British General John Burgoyne, was not only a massive military success, but crucially a propaganda coup that played directly to the ambitions of America's powerful, eager to see Britain fail rival, France. Astonishment number 5 is that the war was not won on American terms, but on French terms. The moment the news of Saratoga reached Paris, the sophisticated, charming, and indispensable American diplomat Benjamin Franklin had the leverage he needed. In February 1778, France formally recognized the United States and signed the Treaty of Alliance. This provided the fledgling nation with essential money, supplies, professional troops, and most importantly, a navy capable of challenging the Royal Navy. The French military contribution was transformative. The most crucial moment came at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. The Continental Army, led by Washington, was only able to trap the main British army under Lord Cornwallis because the French Navy, under Admiral Comte de Grasse, had sailed into the Chesapeake Bay and decisively defeated the British fleet in the Battle of the Capes. This victory, known to the French as the Battle of the Capes, cut off any escape or resupply for Cornwallis's army. Without the French fleet, Cornwallis would have been evacuated by sea, and the war would have dragged on, likely ending in a negotiated truce far short of full independence. The final victory at Yorktown was fundamentally a combined French-American operation. The most famous scene, the British surrender, had more French soldiers in formation than Americans. The reality is that the American Revolution quickly evolved from a colonial uprising into a global conflict. Spain and the Netherlands joined the fight against Britain, leveraging the opportunity to challenge the British Empire worldwide, stretching the British military and financial resources to the breaking point. The American Revolution was an American victory, but it was a multinational one, an astonishing diplomatic and military triumph orchestrated in the drawing rooms of Paris as much as on the fields of Pennsylvania. The price of the Republic. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but the fight had fundamentally reshaped the continent. The new United States had won its liberty, yet the cost was deeper than the debt it owed to France. The war had redefined what it meant to be an American, a definition that remained fractured and incomplete. For the Native Americans, the new republic was a far greater, more expansionist threat than the crown. For the black patriots who fought for liberty, slavery endured for another 8 decades. For the women, like Agent 355 and Anna Strong, the revolutionary principles of equality did not extend to their political rights. The American Revolution was a series of astonishing, fact-rich contradictions. A fight for freedom won with the aid of a king, Louis XVI of France, a war that utilized the world's first submarine, and a victory secured by the invisible ink, laundry lines, and agonizing deaths of thousands in a dark, fetid prison ship. It was a war of the famous and the forgotten, a testament to a revolutionary spirit so fierce and desperate that it forced ordinary farmers and merchants to become spies, soldiers, and martyrs, laying the complex, often astonishing foundation of the American Republic. Part 6. The Valley Forge Crucible, a Winter of Ice and Intrigue. The year 1777 closed with a victory at Saratoga, securing the French alliance. But for the main body of the Continental Army, the winter of 1777-1778 was not a celebration. It was a crucible. General George Washington chose Valley Forge, a small valley in Pennsylvania, as the winter encampment. It was a place of strategic high ground, but an absolute nightmare of logistical failure. Astonishment number 6. The suffering at Valley Forge was not primarily caused by the weather, but by the failure of American bureaucracy and profiteering. While the winter was brutal, it was the corruption within the civilian supply chains that was truly devastating. Farmers, seeing the desperate need of the soldiers, often chose to sell their grain and livestock to the British in nearby Philadelphia. The British paid in gold, while the Continental Congress paid in virtually worthless paper currency or IOUs. The result was a grotesque paradox. 20 miles from the starving American army, the British were feasting, purchasing American goods with American money. Washington's letters from Valley Forge paint a picture of utter desperation. The cry of no provisions, no meat, no flour was heard throughout the camp. The men were literally naked, often without a whole shirt or a decent pair of shoes. Of the approximately 12,000 soldiers who entered the camp, nearly 2,500 died, not from battle wounds, but from disease, starvation, and exposure. Men wrapped their frozen feet in rags and straw, and the trail leading into the valley was marked by bloody footsteps. The conspiracy against Washington. Amidst this suffering, a more insidious enemy emerged, the Conway Cabal. This was an astonishing political conspiracy hatched by several jealous and ambitious American generals and members of Congress, who believed Washington was incompetent and should be replaced. They championed General Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, as a potential successor. The cabal got its name from Brigadier General Thomas Conway, an Irish-French officer who constantly criticized Washington's leadership in private letters. Washington, with his characteristic dignity and political astuteness, masterfully exposed the plot. He allowed a key critical letter to fall into the hands of a trusted ally, effectively forcing the conspirators to backpedal in disgrace. The astonishing takeaway is that Washington, the revered figurehead of the revolution, faced as much danger from ambitious internal rivals as he did from the entire British Army. His survival was a testament not just to his military prowess, but to his political skill in maneuvering a treacherous landscape of egos and distrust. The gift of the Blue Baron. The true turning point at Valley Forge was the arrival of a man whose very existence in the Continental Army was an extraordinary, almost comedic piece of theater, Frederick Wilhelm von Steuben, a Prussian military officer. Von Steuben wasn't actually a baron. He had inflated his credentials to gain an audience with Franklin in Paris, claiming to be a former lieutenant general to Frederick the Great. Franklin, desperate for professional help, facilitated his arrival. The truth of von Steuben's rank was irrelevant. His impact was immediate and profound. Astonishment number 7. A flamboyant Prussian-born drill master who spoke almost no English fundamentally professionalized the American army. When von Steuben arrived, the Continental Army was a collection of independent-minded, poorly trained militias. There was no standardized drill, no common method for marching, loading, or firing. Von Steuben changed everything. The drill manual. He wrote a basic training manual, shouting commands in German and French, which were translated on the spot by his aides, often cursing at the slow-witted Americans. Bayonets. He taught the soldiers how to use the bayonet effectively, a weapon they had previously neglected, seeing it as cumbersome. This simple training transformed them from a solely defensive force into a genuine offensive threat. Sanitation. He mandated changes in camp layout, forcing the Americans to separate their kitchens from their latrines, drastically reducing the spread of disease, an act that saved countless lives. Von Steuben didn't just drill the soldiers. He instilled discipline, pride, and uniformity. He was a force of nature, outrageously profane and theatrical, but his efforts created a cohesive, professional fighting force. The ragtag militia that entered Valley Forge emerged as the Continental Army, a body capable of standing toe-to-toe with the British regulars. The most astonishing part of the transformation was its sheer speed. When the army marched out of Valley Forge in June 1778, they immediately engaged the British at the Battle of Monmouth. The new, disciplined American troops held the field against their formidable opponent, proving that von Steuben's methods had worked a military miracle. The legacy of Valley Forge is the astonishing resilience of the American soldier combined with the improbable essential contribution of a self-styled European baron who brought the sophisticated discipline of Prussian warfare to the desperate cause of American liberty. Part 7. War in the South and the Guerrilla Ghosts. By 1780, the British realized that winning the North was impossible. The French were active, and Washington's army was proving too stubborn. They shifted their focus to the southern colonies, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, believing the large loyalist population there would ensure an easy victory. They initially succeeded. Charleston, South Carolina, fell in May 1780, resulting in the surrender of over 5,000 American troops and 4 ships, the single greatest American defeat of the war. The British seemed poised to conquer the entire South. Astonishment number 8. The war in the South was won not by traditional armies, but by a handful of partisan leaders employing brutal, effective guerrilla warfare. As the British began to occupy the countryside, they encountered a resistance unlike anything they had faced in the North. This was a brutal, decentralized conflict, fought largely by American militiamen who refused to follow the conventional rules of engagement. They were led by a trinity of extraordinary characters. Francis Marion, the swamp frog. Marion was a small, quiet man, yet his impact was immense. Operating from the impenetrable cypress swamps and tidal marshes of South Carolina, Marion's brigade was a ghost. They never fought a pitched battle. Instead, they ambushed British supply lines, attacked small outposts, and then vanished back into the swamps. He frustrated the British commanders, who could never pin him down. Marion's genius laid in his ability to sustain resistance while never risking his small force. His actions prevented the British from consolidating control and terrorized loyalist militias. Thomas Sumter, the Gamecock, a fiery, aggressive leader who constantly sought battle, often with disastrous results, but whose relentless attacks kept the British constantly off balance. Andrew Pickens, the wizard owl, the most cautious and strategic of the three, balanced Sumter's aggression with tactical patience. The guerrilla fighters were relentless. Battles like the Battle of Cowpens, January 1781, where Brigadier General Daniel Morgan orchestrated a brilliant double envelopment tactic, a classic military maneuver achieved by raw militia, proved that the Americans could defeat the British head-on. But the true victory in the South was a war of attrition. The British, commanded by Lord Cornwallis, became so maddened by the partisan attacks that they were forced into a chase. Cornwallis repeatedly abandoned his secure supply lines to pursue Marion, Sumter, and the new American commander, Nathanael Greene. This chase led Cornwallis deeper and deeper into the Carolinas and eventually into Virginia. He won several Pyrrhic victories, battles he won but at a cost that severely weakened his army, before finally abandoning the interior and marching his exhausted army to the coast, seeking to resupply and rest. His chosen location, Yorktown, Virginia. Astonishment number 9. The British general's attempt to escape the relentless, small-scale guerrilla war led him directly into the French-American trap that would end the entire conflict. The relentless pressure applied by a few thousand swamp fighters and backcountry militias forced the powerful British army into a corner, making them vulnerable to the final combined naval and ground assault that was rapidly converging on the Chesapeake Bay. The greatest drama of the Revolution's final act was a collision between three forces: the relentless American guerrillas, the weary British main army, and the converging power of the French fleet and Washington's professionalized continental. Part X. The Second Revolution. Crafting the Constitution. The profound disunity and near collapse of the government under the Articles of Confederation, highlighted by Shays' Rebellion, shocked the founding generation into action. They realized that achieving independence was only the prelude to the true challenge: building a viable, lasting republic. Astonishment number 13. The U.S. Constitution was written in secret and involved a series of intense compromises that saved the Union but enshrined the nation's deepest contradiction: slavery. In the summer of 1787, 55 delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island refused to attend, gathered in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. Almost immediately, they agreed to discard the Articles entirely and draft a whole new government. The Great Compromises. The convention was defined by three critical, often bitter compromises between large states and small states, and between northern and southern interests. The Great Compromise. Representation. The problem. Large states like Virginia wanted representation in the new legislature based on population, the Virginia Plan, while small states like New Jersey wanted equal representation for every state, the New Jersey Plan. The delegates created a bicameral, two-house legislature. The House of Representatives would be based on population, and the Senate would grant every state equal representation, 2 senators per state. This ingenious solution appeased both sides and is the foundation of Congress today. The 3/5 Compromise, slavery and representation. The problem. Southern states, wanting more power in the House of Representatives, demanded that enslaved people be counted for the purpose of legislative representation. Northern states argued that if enslaved people were property, they should not be counted at all. The solution. The delegates agreed that 3/5, 60%, of the enslaved population would be counted for both representation in Congress and for federal taxation. This appalling but politically necessary compromise secured Southern support for the Constitution, but guaranteed the political power of slavery for decades to come, sowing the seeds of the Civil War. The Commerce Compromise, trade and the slave trade. The problem. Northern states wanted Congress to have full power to regulate commerce, to tax imports. Southern states, fearing export taxes on their crops and an immediate ban on the profitable Atlantic slave trade, objected. The solution: Congress was granted the power to regulate commerce, but was forbidden from taxing exports. Crucially, Congress was also barred from passing any law against the slave trade for 20 years, until 1808. The document that emerged was astonishing. It was a powerful, practical plan for government built not on high ideals alone, but on a series of harsh political bargains. The Federalist triumph. The new Constitution was not immediately accepted. The ensuing national debate between the Federalists, who supported the Constitution, led by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, and the Anti-Federalists, who opposed it, fearing a strong centralized government, was one of the most intellectually fierce in American history. The Federalists' most persuasive arguments were published in a series of 85 essays known as the Federalist Papers. These essays, written to convince the people of New York to ratify, remain the single most important explanation of the founders' intent regarding the structure of American government. Astonishment number 14. The Constitution was only ratified after the Federalists agreed to immediately amend the document to include a Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists' core objection was that the Constitution lacked any explicit guarantee of individual liberties. In a final, essential compromise, Madison promised that a list of amendments protecting personal freedoms would be added immediately. This promise led to ratification and the adoption of the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, in 1791. The Revolution was finally concluded, not with a treaty, but with a framework for self-governance. Part 11. A Shifting Society, the Cultural Aftermath. The political transformation was accompanied by a slower yet profound cultural and social restructuring that affected nearly every corner of American life. Astonishment number 15. The ideals of the Revolution led to the first meaningful challenges to the institution of slavery and changed the role of women in the new republic. The dawn of abolitionism. The Declaration statement that all men are created equal was a direct ideological challenge to slavery. While the South intensified its commitment to the institution, the North began to dismantle it. Northern abolition. Vermont was the first state to outlaw slavery in its 1777 Constitution. By 1804, all northern states had either abolished slavery or passed legislation for its gradual abolition. This created a clear, permanent cultural and economic divergence between North and South. Emancipation. Thousands of enslaved people gained freedom by running away or through manumission, being freed by their owners, during the confusion of the war. Many enslaved men who served in the army gained their freedom as a result. Republican motherhood. The Revolution did not grant women political rights, but it dramatically changed their perceived social importance, leading to the concept of Republican motherhood. New role. Since the success of the Republic depended on virtuous, informed citizens, it became the patriotic duty of women to raise virtuous, intelligent sons who could govern the nation. New schools and academies were founded specifically to train women in history, science, and literature, not for a public career, but to effectively educate the next generation of male leaders. This focus, while limiting, was a critical step in expanding female education in America. Abigail Adams. The most famous correspondent of the era, Abigail Adams, famously reminded her husband, John Adams, in 1776 to remember the ladies in the new codes of law. Her plea, while largely ignored politically, was a sign of the new empowered voice women found through revolutionary principles. The American Revolution was a process, not a single event. It began with muskets and spies, was ratified with paper and ink, and continued in the hearts and minds of a population striving to live up to the impossible yet inspiring standard of equality they had declared for themselves. Part 12. the complex legacy, and the unfolding American idea. The American Revolution, spanning from the protest against the Stamp Act in the 1760s through the ratification of the Bill of Rights in 1791, was not a simple military victory, but a profound, messy, and continuous process. Its final astonishing legacy is its duality. It was both a triumphant assertion of liberty and a failure to extend that liberty to all. Astonishment number 16. The revolution simultaneously created the world's first large-scale democratic republic and permanently entrenched the institution of chattel slavery for nearly 75 more years. The dual heritage of liberty and hypocrisy. The core of the American idea, as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, was that legitimate government must be based on the consent of the governed. This revolutionary principle spread globally, influencing the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and countless independence movements across the centuries. The very concept of citizens rather than subjects emerged from this struggle. However, this legacy was built on a foundation of profound hypocrisy. Native Americans. The victory of the colonists meant the immediate, rapid expansion westward. The concept of manifest destiny would soon replace the limited expansion allowed by the British Crown, which had established a clear boundary in the Proclamation of 1763. The new republic's first foreign policy was often brutal subjugation and displacement of sovereign indigenous nations. Slavery. By the end of the Revolution, there were over 700,000 enslaved people in the United States. The constitutional compromises, the Three-Fifths Clause, and the protection of the slave trade until 1808 created a slave power that dominated national politics until 1860. The generation that declared all men are created equal failed to live up to its own highest ideal, leaving the most catastrophic problem for future generations to solve. Washington's final crucial act. The ultimate stability of the new republic was cemented by the astonishing personal integrity of its first leader. After serving 2 terms as president, Washington voluntarily surrendered power, setting an indispensable precedent for the peaceful transfer of authority. In his farewell address, 1796, he warned the young nation against 2 great dangers: the spirit of political factionalism, the rise of rigid political parties, and permanent foreign alliances, entanglements in European wars. His conscious decision to step away from the highest office, reinforcing the civilian control of the military already demonstrated at the Newburgh Conspiracy, was perhaps the greatest single gift he gave the nation. Conclusion. The unfolding idea. The American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, and the subsequent constitutional era, 1787 to 1791, were defined by 3 astonishing and intertwined forces: ingenuity and sacrifice. The success of the war hinged on unconventional tools, the turtle and invisible ink, and the unbearable suffering of ordinary people, Valley Forge and prison ships. Political pragmatism. The victory was secured by brilliant, often ruthless diplomacy, breaking the French alliance, and political bargaining, the compromises of the Constitution. The enduring tension. The Republic was founded on a tension between the universal ideals of the Enlightenment, liberty, equality, and the entrenched realities of the 18th century, slavery, patriarchy, and displacement. The legacy of the American Revolution is that the United States was born an unfinished experiment. The astonishing stories of espionage, military miracles, and political betrayals were all necessary to secure the territory and the framework. Yet the idea of the revolution, the relentless pursuit of true equality and justice, was an inheritance left to every generation that followed, ensuring that the struggle for a more perfect union remains the true, ongoing American story. Postscript. Laying the foundations. Hamilton versus Jefferson. The astonishing period of revolution and ratification gave way to the crucial task of governing. Under President George Washington, the tension that was merely constrained by the Constitution immediately erupted in the form of fierce political division. Astonishment number 17. The very first cabinet meeting of the United States government became the birthplace of America's first two major political parties. The primary conflict was between two brilliant men who fundamentally disagreed on the nature and future of the American Republic. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton, the first Federalist leader, believed in a strong, centralized national government led by the elite. His astonishing plan was to rapidly turn the agricultural nation into a commercial and industrial power, largely funded by the federal government assuming all state war debts and establishing a powerful national bank, the Bank of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, the founder of the Democratic Republican Party, believed the future of America lay in small, agrarian states' rights and a limited federal government. He feared Hamilton's centralized economic power, viewing the national bank as an unconstitutional tool of the wealthy elite. The conflict between Hamilton's vision, favoring commerce, industry, and powerful federal structures, and Jefferson's vision, favoring agriculture, individual liberty, and state power, defined the first decades of the Republic. This division, born of the founders' genius and their deep ideological disagreements, quickly spread through the populace, creating the political factionalism that Washington himself had so desperately warned against. The greatest, final, astonishing truth is this: the American Revolution gave birth to the nation, but the struggle between Hamilton and Jefferson defined its ongoing character. The balance between federal authority and individual liberty, between finance and farming, between North and South, continued the revolutionary process well into the 19th century, ensuring the American story would forever remain one of constant, sometimes violent, political evolution. Part 14. Establishing the Judiciary, the Power of Marbury versus Madison. With the executive branch, Washington and his cabinet, having successfully enforced federal law during the Whiskey Rebellion, the new government needed to define the power of its judicial branch. The Supreme Court, envisioned by the Constitution, started as the weakest and least defined part of the federal system. Astonishment number 20. The Supreme Court gained the power to strike down federal laws, a power not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, through a seemingly minor political squabble over a forgotten judicial appointment. The Midnight Judges and the Political Fight. The roots of this power lie in the intensely partisan political climate of 1801. Following the election of Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, over John Adams, a Federalist, the outgoing Federalist-dominated Congress in its final days passed the Judiciary Act of 1801. This act created numerous new judicial positions. President Adams hastily filled these positions with Federalists in the final hours before Jefferson took office. These men became known as the Midnight Judges. One of these commissions, intended for a minor justice of peace named William Marbury, was signed by Adams but failed to be delivered before the midnight deadline. When Jefferson took office, his Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to deliver the commission, effectively voiding the appointment. Marbury sued Madison, demanding the Supreme Court issue a writ of mandamus, a court order forcing an official to perform an act. The case became Marbury versus Madison, 1803. John Marshall's masterstroke. The case landed on the desk of Chief Justice Marshall, a staunch Federalist and a cousin of Jefferson. Marshall faced an impossible political dilemma. If the court ordered Madison to deliver the commission, Jefferson's administration would simply refuse, proving the court was powerless and permanently crippling its authority. If the court refused to order the delivery, it would appear to be a weak, politically motivated surrender to the executive branch. Marshall found a way out through a political and legal masterstroke. Astonishment number 21. Chief Justice Marshall used the Marbury versus Madison case to sacrifice a small political win in exchange for permanent, fundamental power for the judicial branch. Marshall ruled that Marbury was legally entitled to his commission, a small win for Marbury. However, he ruled that the Supreme Court could not issue the writ of mandamus because the section of the Judiciary Act of 1789 that gave the court that power was unconstitutional. His reasoning was simple and revolutionary. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any act of Congress that conflicts with the Constitution is void. It is the duty of the judicial branch, the only body capable of interpreting the law, to declare such acts unconstitutional. The birth of judicial review. This ruling established the principle of judicial review, the power of the Supreme Court to examine and, if necessary, invalidate actions undertaken by the legislative and executive branches of the federal government. Jefferson got his desired political outcome. Madison did not have to deliver the commission, at the cost of giving the Supreme Court a vast permanent power that was not explicitly in the Constitution. The three branches of the new government were now fully realized. Executive, President, enforces the laws tested by the Whiskey Rebellion. Legislative, Congress, makes the laws defined by the Great Compromise. Judiciary, Supreme Court, interprets the laws and decides their constitutionality. Established by Marbury versus Madison. Part 16. The heroes behind the history. Astonishing figures of the Revolution. The entire narrative has been a series of astonishing real stories, but the greatest astonishment lies in the diverse, improbable individuals who shaped them. The revolution was won not by a monolithic force, but by a collection of singular, flawed, and courageous people. Here is a final look at the individuals whose lives became indispensable to the creation of the American Republic. The architects of the Shadow War. David Bushnell, the silent genius who invented the Turtle, the world's first combat submarine. Though his creation failed in its mission against HMS Eagle, his willingness to experiment with technology decades ahead of its time represents the sheer intellectual audacity of the American Rebellion. Agent 355, the anonymous high society woman of the Culper Ring whose identity is lost to history, yet whose intelligence saved the French fleet and ensured the Franco-American alliance survived. Her unknown face is the ultimate symbol of the quiet, personal sacrifice demanded by the war. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, the small, sickly farmer who became the legend of the South. He commanded no great army, yet his mastery of guerrilla warfare and his refusal to be defeated by Lord Cornwallis demonstrated that determination and unconventional tactics could defeat the rigid power of the British Empire. The unexpected foreign saviors. Friedrich Wilhelm von Stiebel, the Prussian officer and self-styled baron who arrived at the depths of Valley Forge speaking no English. His profane, brilliant discipline transformed a starving, unprofessional rabble into the cohesive Continental Army, turning the tide of the war with drill and sanitation rather than blood. Comte de Grasse, the French admiral whose decisive naval victory at the Battle of the Chesapeake in 1781 sealed Cornwallis's fate at Yorktown. This single sea battle, commanded by a foreigner, proved the absolute necessity of the French alliance and ensured the final victory. The controversial leaders. Benedict Arnold, arguably the most effective American battlefield general in the early war, critical at Saratoga and Ticonderoga, whose immense ego and resentment led him to become the most notorious traitor in American history. His story is a chilling reminder of the fragility of loyalty and the high emotional stakes of the conflict. John Jay, the cautious diplomat who pulled off the astonishing diplomatic betrayal of France to negotiate directly with Britain, securing the vast territorial gains of the Treaty of Paris, 1783. His act was self-serving for the new nation, ensuring America's future at the expense of its ally. The Pillars of the Republic. George Washington, a man whose lasting genius was not his military brilliance, which was often limited, but his unparalleled character and political integrity. He rejected the crown, the Newburgh conspiracy, and stepped down from the presidency, farewell address, establishing the essential precedent of civilian control over the military and the peaceful transfer of power, the ultimate safeguard of the Republic. John Marshall, the Chief Justice, who through a technical, politically charged case, Marbury versus Madison, established the non-constitutional power of judicial review, cementing the Supreme Court's role and completing the three-part framework of American governance. The story of the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, is truly an astonishing saga, a testament to human ambition, survival, and the persistent, complex struggle to turn a radical idea of liberty into a functioning reality. The narrative has now covered the military war, the intelligence operations, the crucial diplomatic alliances, the constitutional founding, the early political conflicts, and the establishment of all three branches of government. It is a comprehensive account of the Revolutionary and early Republic eras. Part 17. The Enduring Echo, the Revolution in Modern America. The American Revolutionary War was not merely a historical event. It was the origin story of a national identity, setting the patterns and conflicts that continue to define the United States today. The greatest astonishment is how vividly the struggles of the 18th century echo in the 21st. Astonishment number 24. The fundamental debates that nearly tore apart the founders are precisely the same debates that dominate modern American politics. The lingering shadow of the founders' conflicts. The core ideological battles that defined the early republic remain active. Federal power versus states' rights, Hamilton versus Jefferson. The struggle over the size and scope of the federal government, federal taxation, and federal regulation is a direct inheritance of the feud between Hamilton's centralized federalist vision and Jefferson's localized republicanism. The balance of power established by the Constitution is perpetually tested by every new legislative, executive, and judicial action. The interpretation of the Constitution, judicial review. The power established by John Marshall in Marbury v. Madison, the ability of the Supreme Court to strike down laws, ensures that the meaning of the Constitution is a dynamic, constantly contested political battleground. The founders' compromises are relitigated with every major ruling. Political factionalism. George Washington's stark warning against the baneful effects of political parties in his farewell address was ignored almost before the ink dried. The intense, often bitter two-party system that dominates American life is a direct continuation of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist and Hamilton-Jefferson divides. The unfinished experiment. The most profound astonishment is the ongoing pursuit of the Revolution's highest ideals, often in response to the founders' own compromises. The Constitution secured liberty for propertied white men, but the subsequent centuries have been defined by the struggle to extend that promise to everyone else. The abolitionist movement, the Civil War, and the civil rights movement were all necessary to dismantle the legal scaffolding of slavery and racial inequality protected by the Three-Fifths Compromise. The suffrage movement and the fight for equal rights for women directly addressed the political limitations placed on women despite their vital service during the war, such as by Agent 355 and Anna Strong. The astonishing stories of the spies, the starved soldiers, the pragmatic diplomats, and the dissenting farmers are not just history. They are the bedrock of the American political psyche, a collective memory of struggle, innovation, and compromise. The complex, contradictory legacy of the American Revolution, the triumph of self-governance alongside the failure of universal equality, means that the United States remains an unfinished experiment, perpetually striving toward the high, radical standard set by a document signed in 1776. The revolution was won. The American idea is still unfolding.